The following podcast is a presentation of Project Entertainment Network.
Welcome to the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. Here's your host, Jason A. Meiske.
Beware the brains in the jars. Welcome to episode 137 of the Sample Chapter Podcast, the show where authors read a sample chapter from one of their books. And what in the world am I talking about? Brains in jars? Well, if you want to learn more about that, you're going to have to listen to this wonderful interview with this week's special guest all the way from South Africa, Elaine Dodge. Not only does Elaine have warnings for us about brains in jars, but we also discuss plotting versus pantsing, avoiding the mushy middle, pantsing those first few chapters, and writing in places that you've never been. That and so many more. I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg of everything that we discuss. It's so great. Plus, we dive into a chapter from her book, Harcourt's Mountain, which is a very steamy chapter that you don't want to miss out on. So yes, all that and much more coming up in just about, maybe 5 more minutes or so, something like that. So stay tuned for that. Hey, before that, I want to make sure and thank our sponsors and podcast friends alike. You know what? Actually, I wanted to tell you about a podcast I've recently become aware of. Was communicating with one of the hosts, and it's called What the Faith. Yeah, it's a pretty neat show. As an author myself, we're always looking for information about other subjects. You know, you got to deep dive into it. You got to learn things about it. Well, in What the Faith, this has been fascinating because every week they are diving into a religion. And instead of just, reading stuff about it or, doing their own investigations, they're actually having in-depth, open conversations with somebody of this faith. They've spoken to Mormons. They've spoken to somebody from the Satanic Temple. Even some discussions about race and faith, which has been, I thought, was really interesting. So, and it's, now they're not a part of any of my podcast networks, but like I said, I was in communication with one of the hosts and we were having a nice little chat, and I promised them I'd check out the show and give them a shout out if I liked it. And yeah, it's a really nice show, and they do a good job of just keeping it open-minded and just giving the facts, just giving the opinions of here's somebody of this faith and their experiences with it. So it's really neat. I invite you to go ahead and check that out. And once again, that's called What the Faith. It's a really neat show. Now, as for my podcast friends that are part of the networks, let's start off with Pop Goes the Culture Network. That is a collection of half a dozen shows or so over at popgoestheculture.com, with shows like The Amazing Nerd Show, Fanatics and the Fan, the Way Awesome Show, not to mention the flagship show, Pop Goes the Culture Podcast, and one of my favorites has just returned, which is The Backlot by Alamo Drafthouse. That's really exciting because they were off the air for quite a long time, and then, of course, for several months, and then COVID hit. So, of course, the theater shut down, but it's nice to hear them back on the air again and discussing movies and things that are coming up. So, check out all of those and more by clicking the link in the show notes for Pop Goes the Culture Network. And, check out those shows. And then I want to also thank my other podcast network, Project Entertainment Network, with 35 different shows over at the network. Amazing shows like Your New Opinion, Wild Speculation, The Mondo Method Podcast, Spilling Ink, Monster Attack, Matters of Faith. Hobbies include writing, Hard at Work, Hash Time with Duncan, which is a cool one because, football season's about to start, thank goodness, and so much more. Hey, check out this advertisement for one of those amazing shows, and don't forget to click that link in the show notes.
Yo, what's going on, everybody? My name is Duncan, and I'm the host of the podcast, Hash Time with Duncan. On this show, I tackle all the biggest sports stories between the hashes and beyond. If it's a big story, I'm going to talk about it and give you my opinion on it. Subscribe to my show wherever you get your podcast. All you have to do search Hashtime with Duncan. And you can follow the show on Twitter at Hashtime with D. Peace.
Yes, indeed. Another incredible show from the Project Entertainment Network. As I've always said before, any one of those shows are going to be amazing. You're going to love it. And I've told you before, I check out every show that's on the network at least once and usually end up becoming a subscriber. So check them out for yourself and see what you think. I also want to thank my sponsors, starting with U-Sto-All out of Warrensburg, Missouri. They are the premier self-storage facility in the Warrensburg area with 2 locations, fully fenced in, gated, and with more than 60 cameras recording 24 hours a day. They offer both climate control and non-climate control and have everything to fit your self-storage needs. Check them out online at U-Sto-R-All.net. That is spelled the letter U, STORALL.net. And lastly, I want to thank my favorite writing software, Scrivener. They are a wonderful sponsor of the show, have been with us for over a year now, and I just love not only having them as a sponsor, but as I said, they are my favorite writing software. I use their software every day for all of my writing. And, and I got to say, I mean, it's really cool being able to have, like right now, I'm writing in 3 different stories at the same time. And I don't know why I'm doing this, but I am. Now, technically, I'm editing one and then writing in 2 others. It just depends on what the mood is or when inspiration strikes. But I know that with Scrivener, all I got to do is click on the title of that book and open it up. And there I have all my research. The chapters are split up. If I need to move something around, I can. It's all available right there within Scrivener. Hey, check out this commercial so you can learn more about it. And don't forget to pay attention for that coupon code so you can save 20% on the regular desktop version. Jason here. Hey, I wanted to take a moment and tell you about my favorite writing tool, Scrivener. Now, I know you've heard about Scrivener because their writing software has been embraced by hundreds of thousands of other writers like you and I, from the novice to best-selling novelists. The reason we all use it is because of Scrivener's core concept to bring all the writing tools you use together in a single application. And with tools like automatic backup, character maps, project goals, and let's not forget that amazing corkboard, you can see why I use Scrivener every day. As a bonus for Sample Chapter Podcast listeners, use code CHAPTER for 20% off your desktop version. Scrivener writing software, built by writers for writers. All right, thank you once again to my sponsors and podcast friends alike. Don't forget to follow them on social media. They all have their own social media pages, and they like to post things regularly. Lots of fun stuff on there. Don't forget to follow this show, the Sample Chapter Podcast, also on Facebook, Twitter, and now Instagram. If you want to reach out to me via email, you can do so at samplechapterpodcast@gmail.com or leave me a voicemail at 660-851-1146. All right, without further ado, let's get on over to our interview with South African author Elaine Dodge. Hello, Sample Chapter listeners. Welcome back to another very exciting episode. This week, we are going all the way down to South Africa to speak with Elaine Dodge. Elaine considers storytelling a legitimate way to have multiple personalities and many voices, as she enjoys writing in multiple genres, such as historical romance, fantasy, no dragons yet, weird fiction, redemptive horror, and humor, far too much to settle with just one. Elaine, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'm so happy to have you here. And you are my very first author from South Africa, or from Africa even, the entire continent.
Oh, wow. That's cool.
So first, let's find out, how are you? Are you staying healthy amidst the pandemic?
I am. I am very healthy. I haven't been outside since probably for about 2 weeks before lockdown happened in South Africa. So I've probably been on my property for about 17 weeks.
Oh my goodness.
Is that right? I think we went down in March. So how many weeks is that? April, May, June, July, August. So that's 5 months. So it's nearly 20 weeks.
Yeah, around
So
20 weeks. Yeah. Oh
yeah.
my goodness. Wow.
But it's kind of okay because I'm an introvert, and I live alone with just my cat, and I work from home. So I don't have any transport. So I have to use Uber when I get around, and I'm not getting into an Uber while there's the plague around. So, life kind of just happened, stayed the same, and the plague went on without me, which is cool.
Yeah. Well, and of course, as they say, with being a writer, we must be just enjoying the staying home all the time, right?
Loving it.
I had somebody the other day saying, like, well, you're a writer, Jason. How are you dealing with this? I mean, you must enjoy being home so much. I'm like, oh no, I'm working more than ever, and I'm having to get up early if I can. I've got to get up early to do my writing, and I'm just now adjusting to a schedule that allows me to write a little bit more and getting back into the habit. But it sounds like it's worked out well for you, though.
Yeah, no, it has. And what's really interesting is that I write for corporates as my day job. And since lockdown, I've got new clients, more work, I've made more money. I'm like, hey, let's just keep this plague happening because this is really working for me. So who knows?
Oh, my goodness. So something I guess for me, the elephant in the room is that you are in South Africa. Now, are you native to South Africa?
I was born in Zambia. I'm actually a copper baby. And by that, I mean that I was born on the copper belt in Zambia. And then when I was about 9 or 10, my family moved to Zimbabwe. At the time, it was still called Rhodesia. But I grew up in Zimbabwe. And then I moved to South Africa about 16, 17 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just such a, I don't know, it just seems like that's just such a different life. It's hard for me to imagine what that must be like in that kind of environment. I'm used to, forests and giant lakes and almost country living here in America. So I can't imagine, I don't know, it's hard for me to picture what that must be like there.
Zambia and Zimbabwe were still, when we lived there, they were still very, it sounds awful, but it was still very colonial in feel. And so your average white family would live in a 3-bedroomed house on an acre of land. Mm-hmm. And it was very suburban living. Even though we had, you go into town, you go into the city, and the city would have the normal city stuff in it. Not massive skyscrapers, but there would be, tall buildings and double-lane roads and things like that. But your average white person would live in a very suburban environment. Obviously, that's changed quite a bit now, because now the suburbs are mixed, which is how they should be. Mm-hmm. So South Africa is very much the same. But in terms of the suburbs, it's probably very similar, except for the fact that in Africa, the suburbs have, 10-foot walls around them with electric fencing on the top and electric gates and big dogs.
Oh my!
It's very weird when I look at pictures of suburbs in the States, and I go, but you've got no fences. You don't even have like a hedge around your garden. That it actually feels quite freaky to me. Maybe it's just my introvertedness. I would not want people to have access to my garden the way it looks on, photographs of suburban. I'm like, get off my lawn.
And I can understand that. That's my wife and I are very much that way. My wife has always lived in the country. So, the nearest neighbor is a mile or more away. And I always longed for the country life. And so now we live just outside of our town in a little area with other homes around us. But most of us out here have fences, privacy fences, because we're out in the country. And although we all get along really well here, great neighborhood, everybody likes their privacy. And everybody likes to sit around the fire pit or whatever and enjoy an evening without bothering the neighbor or without somebody looking over the fence at you or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, plus, it helps keep the neighbors' big dogs on their side as opposed to coming over here with my little dog.
And the bears.
And the bears, yeah.
It helps keep the bears away.
That's
Although
right.
I quite like bears. So, I mean, when in Africa, you've got to drive out of town to get wildlife. You'll get little bits of small wildlife. I mean, I live on a mountain. Well, we call it a mountain. It's actually just a hill. But on the mountain the other day, we saw a little civet cat came and was exploring around. So that was really cool. But I've lived here, 7 years, and that was the first bit of wildlife I've seen, apart from owls and bats and things like that. So we've got a lot of game parks, private and national, but you don't get the big game in towns.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we've been fortunate. We haven't had a bear in the neighborhood yet, although I do know somebody in the neighborhood who thought they saw one recently.
Okay.
Unconfirmed, but we'll see.
Yeah.
We used to live in Colorado, and that was a very frequent thing. We'd take the trash out and, oh, there's a bear. Let me just take the trash back to the house real fast. So, all right. So now with you being in South Africa, you have a series called Harcourt's Mountain, the Harcourts of Canada. Now, how does this happen?
Although I've grown up in Africa, I'm very much a tree person. So I love forests, and I love the whole Northwest Pacific type of forest. Although I've never been to one, the whole, when you see pictures and video of it, I'm like, oh, this is my soul place. So, but then I enjoy going out into the bush in Africa and seeing elephants and lions and hippos just as much. But I love the whole kind of misty forest, very tall trees. Just that whole kind of real mountain stuff. We've got what we call the Drakensberg here, which translates to be the Dragon Mountain, which is really cool. But it doesn't have it doesn't have forest like the Northwest Pacific. It's a very particular type of vegetation here. So I wanted to write something that would be really escapist for me to write. Mm-hmm. So I could spend a lot of time doing research and looking at photographs of the forest and, researching bears and researching, all that kind of stuff. Bald eagles, although I don't think you get bald eagles in Canada. And also I didn't want to set it in the States because every frontier Western sort of book is always set in dry, dusty, hot places, and I'm not a person who likes the heat at all. My favorite is winter.
Okay.
So the thought of having to slog through dry, dusty Texas towns like everybody else did was just not going to happen. So I went for Canada. I still wanted to do a frontier story, so I went for Canada where I could basically do it in a forest.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's a great, like you said, it's a great escapism. And at the same time, you're writing something that interests you. Yeah. Which, as an author, that is something that I have come to learn how important that is. Because if it's something you want to read and you're putting that love into it, that enjoyment into it, it's going to come across to the reader. So
exactly.
That's very well done.
Thank you. And also, I didn't want my hero to be a cowboy. It's really, there are 50 million books about cowboys. More books about cowboys have been written than ever cowboys existed. So I did not want that. And also, I worked on a square rigger for a very short period of time. And I just fell in love with that kind of ship and being on the ocean. So I made my hero an ex-Navy captain, and he comes from a shipping family. And so some of the book is set on one of those square riggers. So that was enjoyable as well.
Oh, wow.
And I read a lot of books that are set in the time of Nelson's Navy. So I've got a fair amount of knowledge about those kind of ships and how they run and what. And also having been on one, I know what the waves sound like and the wind sounds like and the rigging and stuff like that. So I wanted to put that in the book as well, so that it made sense for my hero to not be a cowboy, but to be an ex-Navy captain. But he was going to be living in the forest in Canada, so he needed to, and it was a frontier book, so he needed to have some kind of land-based profession. So he was an apple farmer.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So you've got this broad adventure with lots of sensory details and a land foreign but beloved by you, by the author.
Yes.
It's really cool.
Yeah, I've never been
there. Well, I mean, just going by the cover itself, it reminds me of, I lived in Alaska for a few years, and it's like I can almost picture some of those ranges right there.
Oh, cool. Excellent.
So now, was this something that did you plot this out, or have you pantsed this, and are you planning the series, or is it just as it comes to you? It sounds like you did a lot of plotting.
I did a lot of plotting. So I plot all my novels, but my short stories I pants. Because I like the adrenaline rush of that, because I'm part of a group here it's based in South Africa, but it's actually a worldwide group called 12 Short Stories in 12 Months. The website is deadlineforwriters.com. And the lady that runs it gives us the prompt and the word count and the deadline that we have to post on. You're not allowed to post on any other day except that deadline. And you have to meet the word count exactly. And I have been, I think in the 4 years that I've been part of this group, I've only ever written a short story in advance twice. Otherwise, I write it on the day of deadline. And I think our longest word count is 2,500 words. And so that's a lot of words to get through on the day you have to post it. But but usually they're about 1,000, 800, 1,000, 1,200, that kind of thing. We do have very short ones. One is 300 words and one is 500 words. But I really enjoy the adrenaline rush of having to sit down and write that story and get it in a decent enough shape to get it up on the website on the same day. So short stories I pants, but novels I plot to the nth degree. I did try to pants one novel that I'm working on at the moment. I started it 7 years ago. And I'm never going to pants another novel as long as I live. So, I've written the book now I think I'm in the 4th rewrite of this book. And it's always been the mushy middle that's got me every time. And I think I've got a way around it now. But no, I don't enjoy fancy novels. Life's too short for that. I mean, I keep consoling myself with the thought that J.R.R. Tolkien took 12 years to write Lord of the Rings. But he invented a whole language.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, that's great, but no.
My problem when I completely pants a story with no idea where it's going to go or anything is I'll have ideas pop up in my head while I'm writing and I'll jump to that.
Okay.
And then I come back later and I realize, I've skipped maybe 1 or 2 chapters. What's happening? Wait a minute, how did they get here?
Yeah.
And so like the celebration, like, wait, put the cork back in the bottle. Hang on, I'm not done there. So I've got to have a little more of a guide. I at the same time, if I completely plot out a book, I have a hard time getting back into it because I feel like I've already written it.
Okay.
So I'm kind of in that middle where it's I like a general idea, but something fluid where I can hear that the character is talking to me and telling me where they'd like it to go, and maybe it will, maybe it won't. Depends on how well we get along.
Well, one thing that I've found that I do is that I pants the first chapter. So if I haven't got anything plotted, I haven't got a book I'm working on, or I'm bored with the book I am working on, or I just need a break, whatever it is. Quite often I'll sit down with just a vague idea, or I'll just start writing. I often give myself a prompt, and I'll just write without any thought to book, short story, whatever. And then I discover that I've written a first chapter. And then I'll put it aside and come back to it later and just kind of like fiddle with ideas and think, okay, I could actually make this a novel. And so then I'll start plotting the novel from that first chapter.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it keeps kind of like the adrenaline up. You can, pants the first chapter, or even the first 4.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have got a good start for a novel. And then you're already in it. So you've already written the first 4 chapters. You're already in the book. Now you just need to know where you're going. So the plotting is not so much coming up with the idea. It's making sure you've got all the points written down that you need to hit. Yeah. So I've got a lot of first chapters. In fact, on my website, I think I've got a whole section entitled First Chapters.
That sounds like me with... I have a drawer full of notebooks.
Okay.
I've written down here's a story idea, and I don't really have the story. I just have a scene or a character, a situation, I guess.
Yeah.
And it could be part of a dream I had or something else. And it's just, it's become that earworm, and I can't get rid of it, and I've got to write it down. And I've got a drawer here full of those notebooks that are like that. And who knows if I'll even get back to them, but they're there. So one of these days when I don't know what I'm going to write next or something, I can start going through them and go, oh, yeah. What about this one?
Yeah. It's a good idea. Yeah. I've got a long list of story ideas and story titles in my laptop and some of them are like series. I've got like 5 books in the series plotted out, and I just have to have time to do it. Mm-hmm. If I didn't have to have a day job to pay the rent, it would be so much more fun.
Yes, if only. Oh my goodness.
But another thing that I do is also to keep myself inspired about those story ideas, or even to help me think through them, as I'll create a cover for the book.
Oh, okay. You do the covers.
Yeah.
Wow. I like that.
And then, so when if I'm bored, I can just, if I'm just like flipping through things in my laptop, I'll go look at my covers and I'll go, actually, I really like that cover. Mm-hmm. I really want to write that book. And I'll go back and I'll look at the notes and I'll go, yes, that's a good book. I like that idea. And I'll put out some more notes on it, and I'll do a bit more research. And so when I come to actually write the book, I've got a lot of stuff already done, but it hasn't all been done at the same time. So I can sit down and go, right, where was I? Chapter 4. Read those 4 chapters and then plow on with the next couple of chapters. It sounds like I do everything really bitty, and it kind of is. But when I do sit down to work on the book itself, I make a decision. I'm now going to write the book I'm working on at the moment, which is called The Device Hunter. I'll just sit down and I'll work on that one steadily until it's done.
Oh, very nice. Very nice. Is there anything you can tell us about that?
It's a little difficult to pigeonhole it in terms of genre, but it's a story about, there's this island in the middle of a waterfall, and it's run by the patient master. And the patient master, that everyone on the island is obsessed with building devices. And a blueprint crosses the patient master's desk, and it's like, okay, whoever created this has got to die. So he calls in his chief device hunter. So on the island, you have the growlers, who are the police force, and then you have a very small team of only 4-5 men who are the device hunters, and their job is basically to hunt down the people who create devices that the patent master deems too dangerous.
Okay.
And their job is to either dissuade, by usually violent means, the smith from creating the device, or if necessary, kill the device smith. And so a blueprint crosses the patent master's desk and he goes, no, this one, death. Make sure whoever created this device has to die. And then our device smith goes out to hunt them down. And it's a very involved story. My books are usually not one plot books. There's usually like 3 or 4 different plots happening at the same time, and they intersect and bringing you everybody in the other plots all link in or in and out of the main plot of the book. So in this book, the device hunter, whose name is Thomas Mead, who's dyslexic, badly dyslexic, so he can't read the blueprints. But when he discovers who created the blueprint, everything in his life changes completely.
Wow.
And I can't tell you more than that without giving you time.
That's all right. That's all right. That sounds very exciting. And I think, what I really like about this too is that you're not trying exactly yet to figure out the genre. And I don't think it's that important at this time. I think you're doing the right thing by pushing forward with the story. At least in my experience, since my first book came out, I kind of knew where it was going to go. But since then, I've got other story ideas. I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll figure this out later. Or maybe when I send it out to beta readers, I'll put that, I'll have a list of questions. And among them, I'll say, what do you think genre this is?
That's a good thing. I really struggle to find beta readers, as we say here, beta readers. I really struggle to find them. I've got one who is great. He was one of I used to work with him, and he was a colleague. He became a colleague. He was one of my clients when I worked at a TV production company. So we did this video for him. And he bought my first book, Harcourt's Mountain. He really loved it. And he became like one of my staunchest fans, which is great because, the Harcourts of Canada is the first book's an historical romance, and the second book then kind of turns the series into a family saga series. And so I've got a lot of guys who are really big fans, which is great. One of them. And he has become a beta reader for me. And
great.
But he's actually the only one I've got.
Oh, okay.
But he is an astrophysicist. So he's very good at going, okay, this is wrong. I don't like this. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But I love it. So that's good.
Oh, my goodness. Well, so, all right, with your permission then, ladies and gentlemen, if you're interested in being a beta reader for Elaine Dodge, reach out to her. Click the link in the show notes. I'm going to have that before this is over with, and you'll know how to reach out to her. And if you can't, then reach out to me at the show, and I'll make sure to pass it on to Elaine. So hopefully we'll find you a few more beta readers.
That would be great. Thank you.
So what about, and whenever this new book comes out, please let us know so that we can give you a shout out at the show and let people know that that one has come available.
I will do that. Thank you very much.
So how about your collection of short stories, Lethal?
Okay, so Lethal is a collection of stories that most of them were written on this short story challenge that I told you about. So most of them come from that. There are 1 or 2 that I've written for myself or for other competitions and things like that. And I love doing them because not only are they short and there's, like I've said, this adrenaline rush of getting them done in time, but they're also a way for me to try out other genres. So I have no intention of ever sticking to one genre. I would be bored out of my mind. if I had just write like historical romances, I'm like, oh, please, just kiss her already and get on with it. Let's get to the end. So that doesn't interest me. And I have a very large, eclectic library of my own, of other people's books. So like I've said, I read Book Session, Nelson's Navy. I read a lot of cozy mysteries. I read romances, but my romances tend to be the classics. Like every year, I will reread all of Jane Austen and Jane Eyre and all of that, those kind of books. I'm not a big contemporary romance reader. I read fantasy. So I want to write what I read. I want to enjoy the different genres. And like I read Terry Pratchett. I love Terry Pratchett. Neil Gaiman. And what's great is like some of my short stories have been compared to their work, which is excellent. In fact, I've got one series of short stories that I've been writing for this challenge that is like a tribute to Terry Pratchett, with a bit of Macbeth thrown in. So they are very varied. Some of them are murder stories, and they kind of worry me a little because nearly every single murder story I've written is a wife killing a husband, which might require some counseling. However, I enjoy doing them. So, and they always deserve it.
Of course. We usually do.
Yeah, but in my stories, they're not always for the reasons, well, they're not for the normal reasons. So, yeah. And I have a whole series of mad scientist stories. I've got one set of stories that are basically 7 of the brainiest scientists in the world trying to, well, they will eventually try to take over the world, but they exist purely as brains in jars.
Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. Oh my goodness.
And their first attempt at seeing if they could do this was to kill their human assistant. And they did, purely by being, because they all live in these jars, all the brains live in jars in the university. It was an experiment set up by the main scientist of the story, who is not, because they live in jars, they're not called by their names because that would be a bit freaky. So his name is XLP #304. So XLP #304 is like the mastermind, get it? Like mind, brain in jar. And he is running this whole group of other scientists. And they're all brains in jars. And they're all connected. Their spinal columns are connected to computers. And of course, if you're connected to the computer in the university, you're then connected to the university's super array of computers. And you can do anything you like. And no one can stop you.
Yeah, I suppose not. If you're connected to the internet, then you are therefore connected to the world, really.
Exactly. The only problem is, and it does come up in episode 2 of The Brains in the Jars, where their assistant that they killed, his sister arrives to avenge his death because she's figured out what they did. And all she has to do is delete their files and unplug them. So they've got like, after she does it, they've got like 10 minutes before the brains die to get connected back up again.
Wow. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah, that sounds like a lot of fun. I'm gonna have to check that out. Oh wow. And that's Lethal, the short stories by Elaine Dodge. So oh my goodness. Yeah. We're gonna have to check that out, I think.
Thanks. I'd love to know what you think.
Well, I am a very large proponent of leaving reviews and ratings on Goodreads and Amazon for everything that I read, especially when it comes to books that I find here on the show, because week after week I might.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.
With all these amazing authors that I've got. Speaking of reading widely, that's definitely happened to me since I've been on here. I haven't been able to enjoy a beloved book in 2 years. But but it's been great because I'm finding new books that I'm falling in love with.
Good.
And I will definitely let you know what I think and definitely leave a review. So
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Elaine, this has been fascinating. This has been so much fun, and I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Thanks. It has been fun.
Where can people find and follow you?
Okay, so I've got Facebook page. So I've got a couple of Facebook pages. I've also, my website is ElaineDodge.com, and I'm on Amazon and on Goodreads.
Great, yeah, and I will have links for all this in the show notes so everybody knows to just click below, and they will pop on over.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Oh, it is my pleasure. It's my pleasure. So we are hearing from book one of the Harcourts of Canada, Harcourt's Mountain. Is there anything we should know ahead of time about today's reading?
Well, the first chapter is, I was going to say a little steamy, but it's not really a little steamy. But just in case.
All right.
Just in case. Okay.
I like it. Just enough of a tease. So, all right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for me to step aside and listen to this steamy chapter from Elaine Dodge and Harcourt's Mountain.
1867, Silver Birch Landing, British Columbia, Canada. He watched her sashay across the saloon of the Silver Forest Hotel. Seduction written clearly on her face and in every curve of her body. Harcourt had to admit she was enticing. Big violet eyes, black hair twisted up in inviting curls, the knowing smile on her red lips, not to mention the tight, low-cut dress, leaving little to the imagination. It all promised untold carnal delight. Her perfume, a dark, satiny aroma, eddied around him as she swayed to a stop in front of him, her hand on her tiny waist. He smiled. Miss Butler? Mr. Harcourt, I was watching you. You play well. His smile deepened. He'd been very aware of her gaze during the game. As he left the poker table with the evening's takings, most of which had come out of Stephen Butler's pocket, he'd seen the calculating look on the man's face. A few minutes later, in the mirror above the bar, he'd watched Butler give the girl instructions. What kind of father would send his daughter to seduce a man? Here she was, and apparently it didn't worry her in the least. In fact, she looked as if she were enjoying herself. This could be interesting. Would you like something to drink? He offered. Some champagne would be nice. He raised an eloquent eyebrow. We have to celebrate your winnings, she said, using her little girl voice. Did she always talk like that, or only when she was trying to entice a man? Of course, he nodded at the barman. While the waiter was opening the bottle, a very expensive bottle, he noted, Harcourt looked Ida Mae Butler over, slowly. The fact that she wasn't insulted by it stirred his amused contempt. He handed her the glass. Her fingers drifted over his as she took it. He was disappointed. She wasn't even original in her tactics. Mind you, she couldn't be more than 17 under all that gloss. Taking the bottle and his glass, he followed her to the deep velvet sofa that stood in the alcove to the left of the bar, the one behind the potted plants and the artfully draped curtain. She put her heart into the performance, and Harcourt played along to see just how far she would go and exactly what she wanted. She coquetted outrageously for the length of time it took them to finish the bottle. When a waiter came to see if they wanted another, to Miss Butler's obvious disappointment, Harcourt shook his head. As the waiter left, she stretched out her hand towards the cord that held the curtain in place. Harcourt was quicker. He captured her hand, saying, "Leave it. It might set tongues wagging." She shot him a look, as if trying to read his face. Harcourt smiled, lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it. "We wouldn't want that," he said. She fluttered her eyelashes. "Mr. Luke Harcourt. You don't mind if I call you Luke?" Harcourt wondered if she seriously believed that half a bottle of champagne had made him more pliable. "Not at all, Miss Butler." "You're a very good poker player, Luke. How much did you win tonight?" She moved closer, her knee touching his. "Just over $500, I believe." "You don't know for sure?" She laid her hand on his thigh. He shrugged. Counting the money while you play is a distraction. How wonderful to be able to play and not worry about how much you might be losing. That's awfully brave. You must be rich. Harcourt gave a short laugh. Not rich enough for you, Miss Butler. You could be very rich. My father says your mountain is a gold mine. Ah, of course. Does he indeed? Oh, yes. Her fingers danced lightly on the muscle of his leg. He says a man could be wealthy overnight with all that lumber and salmon, not to mention the possibility of gold. Imagine how exciting it would be to discover gold. Her hand tightened. Imagine. It must be awfully lonely living up there on your own. She gazed into his eyes, her hand drifting up his thigh. I'd be terrified. It's so far away. No one there to keep you company. What if something bad happens? Indians or bears? She took his hand, pressing his palm on her chest. Here, you can feel my heart trying to leap out of my body, even thinking about it. He let it lie on her white skin for a moment. It had been a long time since he'd been with a woman. He felt a momentary flicker of disquiet. But looking into her eyes, he caught a glimpse of her empty, amoral little soul, and knew he had no cause for concern. He moved his hand around till it cupped the soft weight of her breast. She breathed in. If you sold your mountain to my father, she murmured, you would be very rich. You could move to town. We could get to know each other better. Her hand crept up his thigh. I'd like to get to know you, Luke. Very well. He ran his thumb gently over her skin and bent towards her. She closed her eyes. Her red lips parted, softening in anticipation. Her breath came quickly. He gave a soft laugh. He could feel her skin begin to warm under his fingers, her desires spreading through her like smoky whiskey, melting her in his hands. She seemed to have totally forgotten who was meant to be seducing whom. Luke, she purred. Miss Butler, will you do something for me? His voice was so latent with want, she almost moaned in response. She could feel his breath on her face. She tilted her head back, shivering as his lips moved very gently on her neck, the tip of his tongue touching her. Anything. Anything? His voice was deep, intoxicating. She pressed herself into his hand. Yes. Good. His voice was normal, hard even. He released her and sat back. Tell your father my land is not for sale. She blinked. What? You heard me. Neither my land, nor my person for that matter, is for sale. He rose and put on his jacket. But why? I mean, I don't know what... She stared up at him. The shock of his rejection was swiftly replaced by outrage. She leapt to her feet. Oh, how dare you? You were... If you do want to get to know me better, Miss Butler, you can start with this. I'm not interested in little girls.
Ooh, steamy indeed. Hey, that was Elaine Dodge reading a sample chapter from her book, Harcourt's Mountain. It was very exciting, and it's a lovely book I cannot wait to dive into myself. Make sure you click the link in the show notes for more about Elaine and all of her books. And if you do check out the book, make sure you leave her a review, just like I'm going to do. Don't forget to also click that link in the show notes for our podcast friends and sponsors alike, and hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss out next time when we come back with a brand new author, a new book, and an all-new sample chapter. Take care, everybody. We'll see you again real soon.
This has been a presentation of the Project Entertainment Network.